Hello, and welcome to PRISM. PRISM is a design-oriented podcast hosted by me, Dan Harden. Like a glass prism that reveals the color hidden inside white light, this podcast will reveal the inside story behind innovation, especially the people that make it happen. My aim is to uncover each guest's unique point of view, their insights, their methods, or their own secret motivator, perhaps, that fuels their creative genius. Today, I'm talking with James Wallman.
It's such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much. You are a best-selling author, entrepreneur, futurist, keynote speaker, and government advisor. That's interesting. I'd like to hear about that. The UK government, right?
Yeah, I'm also a dog walker.
You're a dog walker. Why isn't that the first thing on your bio?
It didn't used to be on my thing, but, I'd also pick up dog poo, therefore. But that's, I gave a talk yesterday, and, when someone introduces you and you always hear this kind of list of things that you've done, and you always kind of think, oh, wow, listen to that. That sounds good. And then you kind of have, especially, since we've entered the kind of Zoom world of working from home, during this COVID time, you think, well, actually, I'm at home. And we're all at home doing our thing.
Isn't it
trying to get through this thing.
It's so good to bring it down to a human level, isn't it?
Yeah. That's why having a dog is so good. But I do those other things as well. That's true.
Okay, you have done some significant things, and that's why we wanted you on this program. You've also written 2 best-selling books about the experience economy.
Yeah.
Stuffocation, which I read when I met you, and Time and How to Spend It, which the Financial Times named one of the must-read books of 2019. You also run the Strategy, Innovation, and Futures Consultancy. The Future is Here. That'll be interesting to talk about that. Mm-hmm. And your opinions have appeared in so many different places: New York Times, Financial Times, The Economist, Wired, etc. And let's see, what else here? You advise the British government and your role as sector specialist for the experience economy. There's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack here with you. And the reason I invited you is the things that you think about are things that I think industrial designers like me and the people that will be listening to this should hear about. It's like, why are we designing? What is the context of our work? What is the definition of prosperity? Ever since the founding of industrial design over 100 years ago, its primary business objective has been to sell more product, because the corporate rationale was that if you made your products better looking back then, they would be more marketable. And they were. Those early industrial designers, they proved that. And their design helped to catapult these companies like General Electric and John Deere and IBM and all these amazing companies that they became. But since then, design has certainly evolved into a much more sophisticated and multidimensional profession that considers not only product appearance, but the entire user experience, where we're really just trying to optimize, starting with the initial brand exposure all the way to product disposal. So nowadays, almost every aspect of the product is researched and tailor-made for a desired market effect. But one key, and I'm coming to the major question here, one key factor remains the same. The core purpose of especially industrial design is to sell more product and fuel prosperity. Specifically, its purpose is to fuel prosperity as defined by our capitalist model, which means making more money. And it's all about profit, cost reduction, shareholder value, and going to number one, right? But what about people? What about experience design? And how can we evolve this model of prosperity to be more of a humanistic nature? What about well-being? What about happiness? What about the things that you write in your book? What are your opinions about this? And then even maybe insert some of your more recent thoughts, because I think in regards to what we now consider prosperity, I think after the pandemic, maybe we would all question, what does prosperity mean to me? What do you think about these things?
I think a lot about these things. I think that is an incredibly good, rich question. I feel like you set me up here to I could riff from what you've just said for Probably 3 to 4 hours.
I think love it. Do it, man.
Well, I won't do that because nobody wants to listen for that long, and that's fair enough. But it's such a rich point that you made. I've been thinking about. In fact, I was re-looking at. I don't know if you're probably a fan of The Atlantic.
Of course.
And in 1927, you may or may not know this. There was a wonderful essay published by a guy called Ernest Elmo Calkins called "Beauty: The New Business Tool." Have you come across that? Is that like a famous piece that people know about? Because it's such an important, it's an important turning point. It's exactly what you were talking about there in terms of what first came, and actually you can see it in cars as much as anything. So first of all, you have, the Industrial Revolution produces these, Henry Ford produces these cars, and he makes that crazy statement about how once somebody has one of his cars, they should never need to buy another one. I can't remember the verbatim quote, but something like that, okay? And that seems to him like a good idea because he keeps selling cars. And then along comes Alfred Sloan and others, but Alfred Sloan in particular, General Motors, who does something incredibly simple. He sort of changes a few details and some colours by season. He borrows an idea which originated back with Louis XIV, actually, in the time of Louis XIV and the luxury industry, with the idea of the seasons, which is where we all borrow these ideas from, right? So you can go way back to Louis XIV for this, but the people that really got it right are, of course, the Americans, and you can see this in the car thing. And so in the 1920s, you had this wonderful situation where the problems of making stuff that was good had sorted. No, I mean, of course, we've evolved since then, but, there were good toasters, there were washing machines that worked, there were cars that worked. But in order to, what you needed to do is to get people to buy more and to keep buying. And there was a debate at the time about whether, as this was the problem of overproduction, or as it also was seen as, underconsumption. So this was the real moment. The 1920s was a flex point, the shift from an industrial economy to a consumer economy. And for the first time ever, we saw rising standards of living that have been sustained over pretty much a century, which is incredible. And of course, the Americans did it first, and then the Brits and the other countries copied it, because what this led to was this consumer-driven, materialistic economy where people would buy more stuff than they need. And of course, consumer engineering was both in terms of not changing the function of the product, but the aesthetic of the product, exactly as you're talking about there in terms of industrial design, or one element of it, but also consumer engineering in terms of credit. Well, the thing is, if people don't have money to buy a car, they won't buy a car. But if you loan them the money to buy a car, if you give them credit cards, they will go and buy that car, and they will buy these houses, etc. And what that does is it fuels the economy. And what that's led to is an incredible, unprecedented rise in standards of living that humans didn't have till then. It's really easy. Lots of these millennials today, now I'm sounding old, but will really kind of be cross about what's happened. Obviously what's going on in the environment is terrible. We have real problems. But they forget that until from the point in the 1920s, really, the masses for the first time got a chance to have really good standards of living. I've given talks where I've stood up at the beginning and said, who's had a shower here today? Yeah, and of course, you have a few people that go, you can see them, maybe it's in the UK, that go a bit red, but generally everyone sort of laughs. And then I say, okay, imagine think about Queen Victoria for a moment. Now, geographically, the British Empire was the most successful ever. I think it covered about 20-something% of the world's mass. You could go around the world pretty much without leaving, was it Queen Victoria? Yeah, Queen Victoria. Yeah, without leaving Queen Victoria's land. And so a very wealthy woman. Then I say to people, what do you think her shower was like? Okay, do you think she had a good shower? Now think about the shower that you used this morning. Whose shower do you think was better? Now, not in terms of course, she probably had some pretty amazing mosaics, right? In her shower. But think about the ability to choose the water temperature and the water pressure that you had. Chances are, Dan, you had a better shower this morning than Queen Victoria had for the whole of her life.
Is everything you just talked about, the rise of consumerism and product and materiality and conveniences. Yes, they make our life, we feel better perhaps in the moment. Do you think it makes us happier? All this consumption and stuff and materiality and even design. I mean, I think it does. It's so hard to for me to like place myself back in like 1880, would I be as happy as I am now in 1880? Or how much of what we have done with after the Industrial Revolution has contributed to my happiness?
Yeah. Hey, it's a brilliant philosophical question. The thing is, living we can go back to Aristotle for the idea of living the unconsidered life is not worth living. And consideration is design. So whether you're thinking about the design is choices, right? So whether that's the design of a car, design of a home, design of a life, design of how you spend your time, this is design. Design is about choices, I think. So therefore, there's loads of stuff that's come with materialistic consumerism and the Industrial Revolution, which I think has been terrible for us. But one of the things that's come with it is the ability to have healthcare, which means that we live longer lives. So we've got a lot more time to be miserable in, at which point we can make some choices. And I think that too many people have got caught up in the bad sides. There's a wonderful book by a guy called, forgive my memory for a moment, but the book is called The High Price of Materialism. And he's at Knox University. It's a brilliant book. And the problem with being materialistic is it's really bad for your well-being. If you think you're going to find happiness in stuff outside of you, and this is one of the problems that came with materialistic consumerism, was that we ended up thinking that if you get the girl, the guy, the car, also the job, right? There was an incredible shift in the 20th century from ideas that were internal and thinking that happiness was about being honest and having integrity, to being much more the culture of personality rather than character. So everything is about outside, and you'll find happiness outside of you, and that has been really negative. So, and that's where my work comes in. I refer to that Ernest Elmo Calkins piece, partly because I think that in the same way that essay of his, beauty is the new design tool, I want to write a piece for The Atlantic called Experience, the new design tool, the new business tool, forgive me. Because I think that we're at a point today where products are good, services are good. If you go with the concept in the book, The Experience Economy, about the progression of economic value, of how we've risen from agrarian to industrial to service and now to an experience economy, all those things that have come before have become commoditized. And the great example for this, really, and this is borrowing from Joe Pine and Jim Gilmore, who wrote this book, is coffee. If you think about the value of coffee beans, they're not worth so much, right? If you think about the service, industrial goods, so you think about buying, you guys have Nescafe?
Yes.
Or just right. Okay. So, if you buy Nescafe, instant coffee from your local store, that's, I don't know what that costs, $4 or something for but per cup, it's probably like 25 cents a cup. And then you get a coffee, a service good in a local cafe. Maybe that's going to be like $3-4 for a cup, right? And then you go to Starbucks, or you go to Starbucks, it's probably going to be what, $5-6 for a venti latte, no real milk, some sort of special thing. You can end up spending $6-7 on a coffee, or you go to a specialty place and pay even more as well, right? So you can see at each level here, what's happened is the previous incarnation of the economy, the previous thing in terms of the progression of economic value has less and less value, and it's become commoditized.
Sure.
And so if as a designer, if as a business you want to stand out, if you want to connect with customers and where customers are seeing value, and you want to move beyond being commoditized so you can charge a premium to be successful, you need to think about the next level here. So you can't make money from commodities. It's hard to make money from products. It's hard to make money from services. And really where you need to play, where you're creating the greatest amount of value, and therefore you're putting yourself in a position to capture the most value, is through the experience.
Absolutely. And I think even what we're doing right now, I have a lot of hardware around me, these commoditized products. They're good ones, but what we're doing now is something far more than that. It's the services and the software. It's enabling us to communicate that we are the way that we are. This is the experience economy happening right now, what we're doing right now.
Yeah. I saw this in China, actually, a statistic, and it said that something like 93% of people there said that if it was a choice between their iPhone or WeChat they ditch the iPhone.
Yeah. Ironically, there's a parallel drive happening because there's still this insatiable desire to consume amazing design, right? We're seeing this everywhere. Design has become commoditized, yes, but more people appreciate it. More people see it. They want that identity. They want the brand association. But what I'm seeing is this insatiable drive is creating this disposable economy, of course. People are consuming product the way that they watch TikTok. It's so fast, people will buy something and look at my cool new headphones. And yet it becomes a fad, and they might put it down after a month and it's gone. They're on to the next thing. So how do we reconcile this dichotomy of yes, we understand the experience economy, we want it, but we also want more hardware. There's a lot of want, isn't there, in society today?
Well, again, this comes back to the structure of the design. I think it was Victor Leblanc who wrote fantastically on this in the 1950s. And at the heart of the consumer project is consumer dissatisfaction. Somebody has to think what they have isn't as good as the next thing that comes along. And I'm not anti that, because look, that's also called progress. And the fact that so many people not just have this insatiable desire to have better things, but that it's available to them, that it's possible to them. And this just wasn't possible for our ancestors in the masses. But I'm not going to fully agree with you that this insatiable drive exists for more and more products, and it's about the brands. Because take these headphones that you can see I'm wearing here. These they're Sony's ones, and I got them in New York when I was there just before the pandemic, and they are awesome. I did some research, but my brother did some research, and he got a pair it wasn't Sony, it was some other firm. But they're the great noise cancelling headphones. They work. They do a really good job. Yeah. Of course, what happens here, the same with, somebody figures out a way to do this, like Tesla, for example, of how to do, electric cars, and it's amazing. And you get that innovator, and then someone else figures out how to do it too. And then it becomes not quite commoditized yet, but that will happen. My work as a trend forecaster I've been doing since 2004 is understanding how things change through our societies. And this is, Dan, I may have told you this when we were drunk in Vegas that time, so stop me here if this is too much. But the way this works, and this is based on work originally by a sociologist at the University of Iowa in 1962, and it's something called the diffusion of innovations. It was originally the back end of his PhD thesis, but it became this book. And this observes how ideas spread through any community, and it works. It works everywhere. It's also, people call it the technology adoption curve nowadays. I've seen it called that, but it's all borrowed from Everett Rogers, the sociologist who figured this out. And it basically works in a way that you'd have seen this. It's the smooth S-curve of adoption. You get the innovators who try something first, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and then the laggards, the ones who, the people that still have landline phones. Right. Actually, I don't. Yeah, my mum still has one, but not many people have them anymore. Oh
man, they're almost extinct here.
Yeah, right. Or people
that is the classic adoption curve that we're all, especially as designers, we're all familiar with that. We try to extend, lengthen, and elevate that curve. We try to control that curve, that adoption curve, but we're not very good at it, I would argue.
When you say control it, surely as a designer, the idea is to push it steep as possible to get as many people as buy your products. Yeah, okay, fine. Well, you're an expert.
And also for a more timeless experience, we really seek that. The opposing force, of course, is technology, because even those headphones that you're wearing now, as good as they are, and I think you were trying to convince me that no, that is a good product that is lasting, and I am satisfied with it. I'm going to stick with it. But I'm going to guess that in a year, something better is going to come along, and you're going to want that. Right? So there's technology is working against that curve. So maybe it's okay to have cyclical adoption curves where you have a wonderful experience with a product, and then you have another one after that.
I know that this is for a podcast, but you can see me on this screen. Can you see how old this iPhone is?
Oh my gosh, you actually have a real button on the bottom.
it does what I need it to do. And I also don't have email on my phone. So I don't have email on my phone. I don't have Twitter on my phone, because I've done the research on what you should do in order to be happy. And this is partly this thing about talking about this move. And I'm not talked about it yet, but this move, I believe, from materialism to experientialism is to do with the fact that we've reached, it's not anti-materialism, it's more kind of super, and I mean super with the Latin term, on top of materialism. Now we have enough things. What we should look for, the smart person who just stops for a moment, and let's use Ferris Bueller as the great philosopher. Life moves pretty fast. You should stop and look around him once in a while, otherwise you're going to miss it. What you want out of life is not to die as the person with the most toys in the graveyard. Winning nowadays, I think, is changing. You want to get the most out of the existence you have. You want to live a long and healthful life.
Yes.
Look at the push towards healthiness, because in the old days, you'd live a certain time, you'd do your job, you'd get your gold watch, and you'd have a short retirement and die. And that's why all those systems made sense. But now people are living longer, and we're much more conscious of what life is going to be like when we're in our 70s and our 80s and our 90s, because obviously there's just been a knock to life expectancy because of this pandemic. But I think it's not just about gathering things, but thinking, okay, I've got this 80 years and 10, and hopefully, more kind of thing. But and I want to live a healthy, fulfilling life, and I want to have this sense of life satisfaction. And within I think a consumer society gives us that opportunity. We're lucky. One of the magical things is spare money to spend on healthcare.
But how do you retool our description of what gain in one's life means? It just seems like society is on this drive to consume all the time. And I agree with you. You don't need all of that stuff. You really don't, if you think about it. I even have to force myself at the end of the day, probably around 8 o'clock at night, I just decide I'm not going to look at my phone anymore. I will listen to music, play the guitar, do some art. And I feel this pull. I feel the pull, like, I really should be in contact. Or what if I miss this? And I have to just tell myself, no, you don't need to do that. But I think there are a lot of people that maybe don't realize that they have these choices. And are we conditioned as people to overconsume? I think we are. And how do we deal with that?
That's a superb question. I think we are conditioned to consume, and the problem is no one tells us how to stop, because that's what the system is based around. And that's one of the,
Exactly.
that's the reason for the success of our system. And I think this is why this book, Time and How to Spend It, has had some resonance and caught on with some people, and why the FT liked it. Because one of the things it looks at is that we're taught to consume, but we're not taught how to spend our time. Everyone wants to learn the skills of production, but not, we want to get an MBA. You want to learn how to do social media. You want to learn how to code. But no one wants to learn the skills of consumption, of how to manage your time. It's interesting that you have that pulled down as someone who's really successful. When you talk about listening to music, I'm guessing you've got a record player. You got a record player or no?
I do, yes.
Nice. And the joy, right? The joy of analog.
The crackle, the pops.
Yeah, exactly.
Listening to some old albums, since I was 16.
There's a difference. My kids have just got into the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air on my daughter. She's just about to turn 10. And I'm like, I've got a record of that, guys, before he was on the TV. And she's super impressed. Anyway,
love it.
But look, what we need to do is not just think about the skills of production, but the skills of consumption, the skills of living. There's a friend of mine, a guy called Brian Hill, who's at Brigham Young University I guess it's in Salt Lake City, but it's in Utah. And his is the most popular class. He has 700 people come to his class, and he's an experienced design professor. And he takes the learnings from how to design experiences and translates that for people into, this is what you should do with how you spend your time. And I'm nudging him. And actually, I think he's going to write the book, which is great news. And that's what I did with Time and How to Spend It. I talked to people much smarter at me at places like BYU and Stanford and MIT and LSE in London and Oxford and Cambridge and Tokyo. And I took their ideas and I sort of formed it into something simple that people can use to think about how they spend their time. And the same structure, Dan, and I'm sure I've pitched this to you many times, so forgive me, but can be used for any designer who's designing somebody's time. And when you think about designing an experience, it's quite a responsibility because when you design an experience, you're designing somebody's time. My first book, Stuffocation, looked at how should we spend our money? And the answer was spend less on stuff, spend more on experiences, it will make you happier. And the follow-on was a response to the question that people would say to me, this is great, James, spend on experiences, great. So what kind of experiences should I choose? I didn't know the answer. And the answer, when you think about it, is, okay, these are the experiences you should choose, which is really saying this is how you should spend your time. And if you think of the currency of the first book, Stuffocation, was money, how should you spend your money, stuff or experiences? The currency of experiences, yes, it's money. Yes, if you fly to Vegas for the weekend, if you go to Hawaii, if you, I don't know, go to an amazing restaurant or you go to a theme park or whatever you do with your time. But the most important thing you're spending is time, because you can go get more money. You can get a higher paid job. You can get another client. And you can stretch your time a little bit if you restrict the calories you eat, if you go jogging, if you do weight training. These things will make you live a little bit longer. But you're going to die. And you can't buy another week very much. But you can get more money. So when you think about your experiences, you really ought to make the right decisions, because I'm borrowing from the American writer Annie Dillard. How we spend our days is, she says, of course, how we spend our days is how we spend our lives. And so from a personal point of view, knowing how to spend your time, if you don't know how to do that, you're a fool. And from a designer's point of view, if you're designing somebody's time, if you're designing an experience, and that could be EX for employee experience. It could be a product, because a product will come with the time you spend with it. It could be the experience at a theme park. It could be the experience in a restaurant, in an airport. It could be in a retail store, in a mall, wherever. That's one hell of a responsibility, actually.
You bet.
Especially the more successful you are, the more people you reach, the more that your product scales, you have a responsibility to those people, I think. You have an opportunity. You can help them live a better life, or you can waste their time and drain it away in a negative way. And then you can wake up the next day thinking, I sell cigarettes, or I do something that's good for people.
Do you have advice for designers on how they can absolutely make sure that they are imbuing these qualities of time in their solution? In other words, should designers build in affordances in a design that make people aware that they are consuming their time on something of value? Or should a product have more of an ambient presence so that you can think more about just the general experience, and the product, the thing, the materiality is just there? It might, sometimes I wrote something called the disappearing act of good design. Because sometimes, I'm sitting like in an Aeron chair. When I look at the Aeron chair, it's a very beautiful thing, right? Well, it's not beautiful. I don't think it's beautiful. But there's
functionally, it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. But when I'm using it, I'm not thinking about it because it's supporting me and it's doing its job. But when I step away from it, I look at it, then I start to appreciate it for what it is. But during the consumption, it's ambient. So that's related to my question. So how should designers design in this element of time, in your opinion? Because we all need to be a little bit more consciously aware, especially when I see kids like on video games. Now, there's something that's design presenting something to them. They're enjoying it. They're engrossed in it. But how does that apply to more everyday consumer products?
Such a deep and interesting question. I want to come back to what you're saying about affordances and whether a product is good or bad for you. And I'm going to wander a little bit if you don't mind.
No,
my first thought is the difference between a service and there's a distinction between a service and an experience as an economic offering, but also as a thing. And what I mean by that is in terms of there are certain things that should be seamless and get out of your way. like booking an airline ticket, like going through an airport, if you're flying commercial rather than flying private, right? You want that to be as smooth and you don't want to notice it. Or managing your taxes. Guy on the call yesterday from Sweden, but a British guy, actually, brilliant UX designer. You come across him, a guy called Joe McLeod. He's written this wonderful stuff on engineering about the design of the endings of things. Super interesting.
Yes, I've heard of him. Yeah.
Okay. And he was saying that, so taxes, I don't know how painful taxes are for you in the US, but taxes in the UK are a real pain, right? Real pain.
I can guarantee you they're more painful here.
Okay. So, there are companies that have come in to try and make it easier for us. And of course, we all have we have our accountants to help us, etc. But apparently in Sweden, it's a joyful experience. I don't even understand what that means yet. Okay, I'll be absolutely honest with you. But we're going to investigate it, and one of my writers is going to speak to him. We're going to get a piece together on this, although he's a great writer too. That said, of course, during the pandemic, because we have the NHS, I feel very happy to pay my taxes because they've kept us all alive. Lovely people.
If paying taxes can be joyful, that gives me hope that many things in this world can be solved.
And that's where great design comes in. It's a really good example. I think good design is really good design. You often don't notice it because it's so damn good, right? As you say, you mentioned your chair. You just don't. I mean, that's the point of that chair. But then an experience is different in that you should notice it, because a service should be intangible and seamless and simple. But experience, there's a difference between every day. But, big experiences should be noticeable because they should be memorable, meaningful, and possibly transformational. So there are different moments in the journey that a person might have with a product or with a service or with an experience that has different, and I'm borrowing it from a guy called Mike Lai, who runs something called Tanguy UX or something. Oh, I should know that, in Shanghai, but he's like an American Chinese guy. And he was talking about the journey of any kind of experience through something. And there are different moments where you want it to be perfectly smooth, a really good service, and you want the product to work. And there are other moments where you need it to be a really amazing experience that is meaningful for you, that you actually notice.
Think
that's an interesting point. In some ways, I want my service to be minimal
and my experience to be maximal.
Yeah. Okay. That's a quote there. Thank you. I'll borrow that.
But and I don't even know if maximal is a word.
Oh no, it is. It is.
I hardly use that one.
Yeah. We're talking about Omega Mart. Omega Mart, the new thing from Meow Wolf that's just opened in Vegas, and those guys come from Santa Fe, and they talk about maximalism and being maximalist because they want their stuff to be noticed in a world that's been homogenized, a world that's been commoditized, and where everyone's like, let's be minimal, which is all about exactly what you said. Maximum, welcome back. Maximalism in the right place.
Yeah, but the service, what I mean by service being minimal is, something like Amazon, for example, comes to mind. 5 years ago when you bought something on Amazon, oh my God, I got to get my credit card out. And they didn't remember me from the last time, ... Now I just load things in my cart and I press buy now and it's all automated, right? That's a service that works well for me. Then even receiving it lands on my porch.
It's minimal.
Yeah.
I'm really more interested in...
That's a great example of a service. That's not I would describe that as a service, not an experience. Would you mind if I come back to that affordances point you were asking about?
Absolutely.
I thought it was very interesting. I think from the point of view of the designer, the starting point is the end of what's the impact this is going to have on a person's existence and their time. And I'm going to borrow here from a guy called Michael Baumgartner, who's the guy who came up with the concept of the circle to circle and the circular economy.
Yep.
Michael Baumgartner, the chemist. And I remember him talking, we were both giving talks at some conference in Belgium or Luxembourg or something. He talked about how everyone talks about the idea of reducing their carbon footprint, reducing their footprint. And he said, let's just flip that around. Why not increase your footprint, but have a positive footprint instead? So if instead of thinking about your product, so let's say, you can think about what Tristan Harris has done here in terms of technology And, the ethical point of view that lots of these things are designed to keep us on our phone. And, they talk about TOD, time on device, which is obviously where they can make money. And this is what's happening in Vegas with the slot machines, etc. And that's what these things have become. They're Skinner boxes, of course, for people, right? They're designed to keep us there again and again and again. And of course, when you're doing that, that you have a negative human footprint. You're having a negative footprint on that person's existence.
Not always, but yeah, go on.
No, that's what I was going to say. So if you look at the product you're making and you recognize that it has that, you have to maybe look at yourself in the mirror and think, okay, am I basically a tobacco seller? Am I one of these people? And can I go to bed at night and feel okay that that's what I'm doing to people? In which case you go ahead, mine the planet, destroy the place, and see if you can look your children in the face and be happy with what you do. Or maybe if you recognize that this is fun, but only so much fun. Let's take alcohol as a great example, right? There's a difference between use and abuse. It's exactly the same with technology. The addiction stuff. If you look at Adam Alter's, Adam Alter at NYU, with the fantastic work he's done, most recent book, Irresistible, and he compares addiction to devices exactly like addiction to drugs like alcohol. Having a drink is great. Using alcohol is fantastic. And there's data that shows, of course there's data that shows that a bit of alcohol makes you happy. Who doesn't love a beer on a Friday afternoon, right? Who doesn't enjoy that first few glasses of champagne or mojito on a beach or whatever? But there is a point of diminishing returns. Let's go back to Jeremy Bentham when he talked about his first cup of coffee in the morning gave him this much pleasure, and then the next one less pleasure, etc. It's the same with so many things, right? So if your product, if the diminishing returns kicks in soon and it ends up being really negative for a person, gambling, drinking, maybe, certain games on your phone or whatever, maybe the responsible thing to do is go, okay, fine, let's try and figure out a way to make money because this is addictive and well done to us. Ensure these people have a good time, but do it in the way that supports them to let's drink, let's drink some beer and some champagne, but let's not do it for days and days on end because that's bad for us. Right. And then if you flip that around, so instead of being concerned that your product or service or whatever thing you produce has the potential to have a negative human footprint, if it has a positive human footprint, let's take running as a great example. Let's take the Spartan race or something like this. Mm-hmm. If it's got a positive for people, go for it. Get them hooked. Think about sports. Sports is fantastic, whether people are playing sports or watching sports. The positives that are associated with sport, why not turn those people into sports addicts? They're called fans, which fans is another word for consumers, but it's a word for consumers who love it so much, they keep coming back.
Yeah. I love the idea of building in
these mechanisms within a product solution, a design solution, where it can be responsive. So if there is a waning of the experience, if the experience is falling off, if that third cup of coffee isn't doing it for you anymore, as an analogy to a product, to have something in that product, and some software does this, where the product begins to adjust itself for a changing condition. There's something interesting there.
That sounds awesome. Are you designing something like that at the moment? Is that something you're working on, or is it just a thought that you had? I love it.
No, it's just more of a thought, picking up on what you just said. And certainly in software, we try to do that. Good UX design does that automatically. But in product, it's harder to do because so many things are, these tangible material requirements and functionalities. It's like you can't expect your drill to change.
For the contractor that has carpal tunnel syndrome. So I also want to come back to this thing you said about the starting point is the end. And I think more industrial designers need to think about that. First of all, as an industrial designer, you are automatically a futurist because what you're trying to do is think about, okay, I'm drawing something now, I'm CADing something now, but what you need to do is project out into the future and place your product in the hands and minds of that end user. And will it have the desired effect? a year from now or 2 or 5 years from now when this finally hits the market that I think it should have now when you're designing it. And too many designers are designing for the now. Like they make themselves feel good. They sometimes even feed their ego by creating something that is satisfying to them without thinking about that endpoint. That endpoint is so far in the future sometimes. And the future keeps changing. So by the time your design hits the market, it might be irrelevant. It might be like, oh my gosh, and some designers are often surprised, like, well, I didn't expect it to be received like that. And it can be either negative or positive. Sometimes you just get it right by luck. But the starting point being the end, there's something really fascinating there.
Trend forecaster and future. This is the moment I try and pitch my services. Telling the future. Well, but telling the future, figuring out what's going to happen is, of course, it's the great unknown. And there are things you can do. If you think about Schumpeter and the idea of creative destruction, and you think about the magic of the marketplace, means that all sorts of people create all sorts of things, and some of those things flop and fail terribly, and some of them fly and take off, and who knew? And it's not when something's created, when someone's also created a business model around it that makes it work. Innovation is, so I guess it gets taught nowadays and people get it. It's not just having a great idea. It's everything that comes with it. And, sometimes people just miss that point so badly. Think about flight as a wonderful example. It wasn't in 1903 flying literally took off. It was it the 80s that it started to reach the masses, really? It took a long time to affect war. First World War wasn't particularly impacted by flying, but of course, the Second World War was crucially around flying. So, when I try and advise people on doing this, so the way that I work in terms of thinking about what the future is going to look like, it's using this diffusion of innovations. So it's looking at what actually there's a structure that I use. It's about the seed and the soil. And the seed is the innovations that I see happening around, and the soil is the macro environmental factors that exist. And I mentioned diffusion of innovations. I base my work around Everett Rogers' work, but also using what the Rand Corporation came up with in the 60s and stuff that I've added to this over time. But one of the things that's really interesting, I think, is that if you look at Everett Rogers would look at 5 different things to figure out if a innovation was likely to take off. And you can remember this as BECOS, BECOS. And the B is for, is it better? And better, just to be really clear, is a really moot point. Better could be functionally better. It could be economically better. You need to understand the target market very well. The E, though, is it easy to understand? Mm-hmm. Because things that are complex just throw people away. The C is it compatible with how we do things now? So you can think about the ideas that people had for new versions of transport back in the 80s. There was something in the UK called the Sinclair C5, which is this sort of like cross between a go-kart and a car. And it made all sorts of sense for the city, but it was so far removed from what people thought about. It just didn't make any sense.
The Segway is a good example. The thing that was supposed to change our lives, it wasn't compatible with sidewalks.
Okay. It also makes you look like an absolute idiot, which is the O. The O is it observable? Now, the thing about the Segway, what's kind of interesting, actually, it is observable because we've all seen tourists looking like idiots on Segway tours, right? So Segway found a niche. But observable, a really good example is those city bikes, or you have Lime scooters where you are, presumably.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So we don't really have them so much around here because they're illegal in the UK. I used them when I was in Bordeaux a while back. They're just, the reason that scooters are taken off for adults, I'm old enough to think that it makes people look silly, but still, is they solved the last mile problem so well, right? I know last mile is in terms of delivery, but they solve that kind of, if you live in a city, you want to get a short distance away, but you see other people on it. You see that it's a convenient way to get about. It looks kind of handy and easy. And, and also, okay, we're coming to the S. Actually, I got the E and the S are quite simple. The E is easy to try and the S is simple to understand. So forgive me. The S is simple to understand. The E is easy to try. Is it right there and then? If you think about a Lime, for example, is you put your credit card in, and you can take it. You can have a go. It's a really easy way to try things. Okay? Where this is kind of interesting, I think. So Everett Rogers identified these factors back in the 60s. And a guy called B.J. Fogg at Stanford, you may have come across. He's the guy who's known for his tiny habits. He set up the behavioral design practice at Stanford. He's fairly famous for one of his classes that became known as, I think, the Facebook class, because from about 2006, 7 or something, a bunch of people that were in his class used everything he was teaching about behavioral psychology, and they went on to become, like the growth marketing person at LinkedIn and the head of this at Facebook and the head of that. And one of the people in his class set up Instagram, so basically they took all his tools on how to design behavior and they used it on humans. Okay. And it turns out you can create very addictive products. And BJ likes to distance himself from that work as well. And if you've come across Nir Eyal's work, so Nir studied with him, the guy who wrote Hooked. And if you look at, so one of the things, if you look at B.J. Fogg's thing, which is B equals MAT, so behavior equals motivation plus or times ability, and the T is triggers. And the A about ability is he talks about the 6 simplicity factors. And these are, so, motivation, we all know what that means. But simplicity factors are the stuff that makes it either easy or hard for you to do something. And the 6 map almost precisely with the BECOS stuff that Everett Rogers figures for ideas that take off. And the 6 simplicity factors, if I can remember them, are one is what's the cost? And the cost can be the actual price cost, but it can also be the physical effort involved, or the mental effort involved. He talks about, are they non-deviant, which is like compatible. So for the sake of argument, there was a time when sending somebody a message on LinkedIn or looking somebody up on LinkedIn was considered weird, but now it's fine to do that. He talks about, are they simple to understand? Are they easy to try? All these things that might get between you and actually trying this thing. And non-routine is one thing that he talks about as well. So if we are not in the habit of doing something, you may not do it again. Is it better? So, is it easy to try? Is it simple to understand? Is it compatible? Is it observable? Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So you can look at the product or the thing that you are creating, and you can run it through this mill, and you can compare it to, like I say, this is the seed. So we're analyzing the innovation, the product, the thing that you're making, and you can compare that with the soil. I talk about the seed in the soil because if you can imagine, I don't know how much gardening you do, Dan, but if you put a sunflower seed in your
garden, I'm a terrible gardener.
Okay, most of us are nowadays, right? We buy plants, we don't buy seeds. But imagine in those old days, you'd buy a sunflower seed. You'd want to get a decent sunflower seed that wasn't dried out and cracked and, a weak seed from poor stock or whatever. And then you want to put it into rich alluvial soil, decent compost, and then you'd water it well, etc. And it's exactly the same with any innovation. So any innovation needs to be a decent seed in the first place, but the soil it lands in needs to be appropriate for it as well. So instead of it being dry, desert-like soil, it needs to be rich alluvial soil. And so the way I remember this is this BECOS, and the structure here is Das Steeple. Das is, I remember it because there's in Das Boot, the German movie. Don't know if you've ever seen that.
Of course.
Okay, fantastic movie. But Das is kind of my addition. Steeple is standards. You may have come across PEST or PESTLE or Steeple, classic taught at business schools, and you probably come across it. This is about socio-cultural trends and economic trends and technology and environment, politics, legal, etc. You can think about the takeoff of marijuana here, or you can think about actually what's going to happen with the takeoff of psychedelics in the States. You can see that the innovators, you can see, is it better? Maybe I'll come back to this. And DAS is demographics, aesthetics, and science, which I think have been overlooked in the classic PEST, PESTLE, Steeple way of thinking about things. Because think about science as a great example. Until 1964, the consumption of cigarettes in the United States, you can see the graphs, it's amazing. It went up and up and up and up and up and up and up. In 1964, the US Surgeon General made the very clear statement, that smoking leads to cancer. And then what's happened is smoking's gone down and down and down and down. And you can see this in marijuana. It turns out that people that smoke marijuana do not turn into murderous crazies. They just sit around and end up eating a lot of food or
right.
edibles or whatever, right? And you can see this in psychedelics. So I'm a real believer in psychedelics will follow a similar path to marijuana, even though it seems really weird for people that have never, taken LSD or DMT or whatever. And, they are quite weird things to take. But if you look at the BECOS side of this, okay, so are they better? Well, they're really good for post-traumatic stress disorder. Research in the UK and the States, in the UK, a guy called Robin Carhart-Harris has found that, so for people with really bad depression, it's really hard to solve people with depression, particularly people with basically on their way to dying. It turns out that this has an impact. It's like 85% successful. Insane numbers. If they could put this in the water, they would. It's incredible. So is it better? Is it easy to try? I mean, you've got to take.
Probably.
It's scary. It's scary for people, which is holding people back.
But yes, it's easy.
But it's not that difficult, and it's there are ways. Obviously, it's illegal at the moment too. Is it compatible with how we do things now? Well, we take drugs. Drugs are a thing that people take to make them better, both legal ones and illegal ones. There's is it observable? What's really interesting here is once you know somebody who has, I've got a very good friend of mine who used psychedelics to go from having major alcohol and cocaine issues and being a really depressive person. And he, through somebody else, I can't remember who, he ended up taking some psychedelics and he's become happy. He just like, wow, this stuff, it's amazing. So you guys got the problems with fentanyl in the States. That stuff is really bad. But this stuff is actually positive. And then is it simple to understand? Well, here's how it works. You take it in a controlled environment. Michael Pollan's written that fantastic book, How to Change Your Mind, about this as well. So you could see how the viewing on this is changing and why it makes sense. And a few counties in the States are kind of legalizing it to make it possible. There are countries that do it too. Anyway, and then you can compare and think about, so I mentioned it was the science that I was talking about. So you can take this kind of BECOS structure and this dust steeple, compare the two and think, is my product, service, experience likely to be relevant in the future? Yes, especially if you use the diffusion of innovations curve to look at what the innovators are doing today, and maybe even the early adopters, and you can point the way to the future.
You just said in the last 10 minutes so many fascinating things that I didn't want to interrupt you. But the BECOS, seed to soil, your notions of simplicity, DOS. So many designers, innovators, entrepreneurs, et cetera, we're looking for tools of understanding, I think, and how can we ensure that we're going to create something successful and meaningful and impactful to society and individuals and sustainable and all these values that we always try to instill in our creations. In foretelling the future, do you use something like the BECOS, better, easy, compatible, observable, simple, as kind of a filter to know whether or not something is more likely to become either take hold, like your analysis of psychedelic drugs, for example?
Yeah. I've been doing that for some years. Yeah.
I love that. And so many things like seed to soil, to a designer, the seed would be, the innovation itself, and the soil would be the consumption model. And like in our case, the construct of capitalism and consumerism. That's our soil, right? So we don't necessarily think seed to soil, but it's happening. It's a really great way to think about it. And simplicity, and your descriptions of simplicity and breaking it down into cost and effort and being non-deviant and non-routine, simplicity to designers it's kind of like one of our doctrines. We strive for it. It's hard to achieve. Sometimes it's it's so elusive because the harder you try as a creator, sometimes you're adding complexity, not simplicity. It's so hard to get back to the root of what's really good and really meaningful. And sometimes it is something just utterly simple. And the simplicity, why is simplicity so beautiful? I don't know. What is that? What's going on psychologically about simplicity? Do humans crave simplicity? Why is something simple beautiful?
Wow. I wish I knew the answer to that. I'll be honest, I don't. My wife will quote to me, trying to think of the British philosopher who'd said that beauty always has something strange within it, which I think has a truth in it, because then you remember it. Think about that idea of experience versus service. But in terms of simplicity, I think about the Coco Chanel thing, about when just before you go out, always take one thing off. You know, what can you remove? But there's research conducted by, is it Joseph Goodman, that's shown that that people want this stuff. And there's actually a guy called David Robson. He's a science writer and a friend of mine. And he's written something for the BBC the other day about innovators. And the great innovators, what you're saying there is interesting, is the ones that keep going. We believe that after a while, going through brainstorming or coming up with ideas, that after a while our ideas will tail off. And actually the research shows the opposite is true. I think about a quote that I used to use talking about this kind of stuff from Johnny Ive about how hard it is to create simplicity. And I think, look, Dan, I don't know, how many people have you interviewed for jobs with your firm through the years, would you say?
God.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Probably, you know.
And how many have tried to impress you with designs and you just thought, oh my God, that's too much. You're just like, no, you're not, I'm not even, and it's only probably the ones who can boil it. Think about Giacometti, you know, the artist and the sculptor, how he takes away everything that it isn't.
Yep.
And I think and maybe that's one of the things we should do with life. And maybe that's one of the problems with consumerism, is because all this noise, you know, all this incoming noise with ideas and this stuff that people are trying to sell us and trying to be this, be that, be the other thing. And maybe that's why kind of Zen Buddhism and that kind of approach to things and simplicity and minimalism appeals to people. But just to be really clear, I'm not a minimalist at all, because if you're a maximalist, and this is from a design perspective, I'm going to borrow what you said there about, I want my services to be minimal and I want my experiences to be maximal. I think we want our lives to be maximal, but in the right ways. Mm-hmm. So I want complex, interesting conversations with sophisticated, interesting people.
Yeah.
You know, I was looking at hiring someone the other day and it ended up being really complicated. And it was that moment I said, oh, this is a red flag. And I sent a really nice, as nice as email as I could to say, let's leave this. But I want complex, challenging. You've made me think of so many things that I haven't pulled out of the back of my mind for ages. So thank you for that. But I think maximalism in our weekends, in our vacations, in our products, but only the stuff that's really good. Think about a meal. Really simple food, cooked really well. It's good. And you think about some of the best restaurants and the most successful restaurants don't do the fancy food. They don't do the El Bulli kind of, you know, crazy stuff. There's a restaurant in London called Jay Shiki that just does simple food really well.
I think there's a lot to be said about essence, essence of experience, essence of expression. You know, it reminds me of Raiku, you know, just like, so few words, so few intonations, so much meaning. And in today's society, it just seems like so many people are distracted with so much stuff, where it's people sometimes lose sight of the fact that some of these simple, essential things that life has to offer, they're there for the taking, but it's almost like it's so ever present, these opportunities to experience the goodness of life, and yet you can't see it. It's almost like radio waves passing through us right now. I can't see it, but there's so much of it coming through us right now, even as we speak. Why is that? Maybe there's just so much offered that, and it's hard to get the attention of people to really understand, hey, you know what? It's okay to experience the essence. It might be a simple meal. It might be taking 10 minutes to look at a single painting where you start to feel something after not 10 seconds, because everybody wants that instant, like, hey, where is it? Where's the punchline? You know, like a Rothko, it does not connect with you until you're sitting in a dark room with a Rothko, a dim light. And after about 10 minutes, all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I'm feeling something, this almost like a deep vibration, an understanding, a visual vibration that turns into an intellectual vibration. All of a sudden, so much more is offered to you. That's what I find to be a real meaning of essence. And it's so hard for people to absorb, to first see the essence and to truly feel it and benefit from it.
I like what you said. I agree with you. I think that it's those tick box travelers. And there are many people who are tick box travelers through life who just want to get that thing. And they've done it. You know, those people, you know, if you talk to those people that do a 2-week, I guess you probably get people to do a 2-week vacation in Europe and they kind of go to Spain, Italy, Greece. And they're like, yeah, I did. You know, the people that when they talk about a country, they say, oh, I did that.
Yeah. Well, they step out of the tour bus. They take the pictures, they get back on the tour bus. It's like, it's not the picture, it's the experience, people.
Yeah. And maybe it's not their fault, and it's definitely not their fault. But the problem is if you watch too much TV and you spend too much time online and you're one of those people who's like, you think about a pinball machine. I think lots of people live their lives like they're in a pinball machine and they're getting knocked here and pushed there. And, you know, maybe this is about like being on the ocean and pushed by the waves and the, let's go to surfing as a way of thinking about it. You know, those people that just get pushed around, they'll just want, you know, just go wherever. And then there are those people that will fight against maybe the wave to get out. And then they'll ride the thing. And maybe that's I'm warming to this idea of surfing as a metaphor for life. And I'm going to play here, you know, the guy.
Let's play with that for a minute.
Yeah, because maybe those people haven't learned that if you stop, the way you describe that Rothko picture, and obviously you have a few in your home, Dan. Who doesn't, right?
Not real Rothkos. Those are only 40 million apiece.
But but too many people just want to see something and have been there, done that, and tick the box. They think that that's life. But the problem with that approach is because you've not paused long enough to appreciate something. And realize
I got to interrupt you because I love this idea of surfing, because a surfer knows that wave is here for about 20 seconds. You know, the good part of the wave. They appreciate that and they see it coming. They nail it. They ride it. The joy is they know it's very temporary. And if more people would view life like that it is very temporary. There is impermanence everywhere, certainly in a wave, and every condition around it. You don't know if you're going to hit a rock. You don't know if you're going to be bitten by a shark. Yeah, life is the same way.
Yeah. There's a guy that taught me to surf. I was in Byron Bay, Australia, writing a piece for a magazine. I think it was not GQ, Esquire magazine. And he taught Elle Macpherson on the same board I was learning on. So Elle and I have been in the same place, not at the same time, regrettably, but laying down and then standing up. And I remember he said when the wave would come in, and I'm a pretty poor surfer. I was like, right, you know, I caught the first wave, and he was like, oh wow, okay, you're British, and yet you can actually do this a little bit. I think he was a bit surprised, and I jumped off the wave because I'd caught the good bit, and he was like, hold on, that wave has come all the way from the middle of the Pacific. Where was I? So that's the Atlantic. Or come from the middle of the ocean. You ride it till you can't ride it anymore. And I thought that was a really interesting idea. But I'm totally with you. When I give talks about this book, Time and How to Spend It, I'll often start by pointing out, I use this thing, I can't think how many seconds it is now. I think it's something like 64,000, whatever it is. And there's this idea of the time bank. It's from a French guy. And if somebody gave you $64,000 every day, and at the end of the day, your bank account went to zero, what would you do is the question. And the number's not exactly that. And the answer, Dan, I don't want to jump in, is you'd spend as much as you could, because otherwise the money's gone. And that's what life is like. You get these 24 hours every day and it's gone. So how you spend it, it's not just about, I guess it's not just about the quantity of that time, but it's the quality of that time. And I think what you're talking about there is about focusing. And, Joseph Campbell, who wrote the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, about the hero's journey. And he really, he moved from the hero's journey, I think, much more into this idea of vitality and a bit of feeling alive. Yes. And I think way too many people, and what's that wonderful zombie movie from the late 70s or early 80s about the kind of that uses zombies as a kind of as a metaphor for consumerism. Dawn of the Living Dead, I think it is.
Oh, yeah, right.
Too many people are basically living their lives as they've been, turn on the TV, go to work, drink coffee, come home, drink alcohol, buy the things you're supposed to buy. You get your bit of time off. And we of course, we are alive in moments, but we're too often asleep. And the key is to use our short window that we have to do something and to think about what we're doing. Yeah. And that involves stopping and enjoying those moments rather than moving on to the next moment.
James, we've just come out of definitely in the last 100 years, one of the strangest periods of time with this pandemic and all the fear and uncertainty in our society. And all this discussion about the future and maybe rethinking the ways that we consume things, deeper definitions about what true satisfaction means. How do we bring all this together? And how do you feel about the word hope moving forward in the future, especially with what we've all been through in the last year? I mean, are we going to come out of this better?
Isn't Hope a small town in Kansas, as one of your politicians used to say? A politician that I had a lot of time for.
You have so much. It's remarkable how much trivia and names that you remember. I got to say, you're like a walking encyclopedia, man.
No, but that was his line, right? Wasn't it one of Bill Clinton's line? Hope is a place in Kansas or Alabama or wherever. I'm an optimist. I'm really optimistic. This has been a really surreal, deeply pleasant time. But I didn't have to go to war. My ancestors had to fight and they got blown up. One of my granddads was blown up on the beach at Dunkirk 3 times and spent 9 months in an iron lung. And luckily, he died at 89. So, life was okay for him ultimately. But that probably wasn't too much fun. And, the awful time we've had through the pandemic, we were like, you got to stay at home and watch Netflix. Yeah, that's boring, but it's not that bad. So I feel that I feel very optimistic about what humans achieve. I think we solved the problem of scarcity. Lucky us, because of consumerism, because of the Industrial Revolution. We don't live next to our animals unless they're clean animals because they're pets.
And because of all this technology, we've been able to do this. We're still connected.
Oh, think about what the pandemic would have been like pre-Zoom. And video calling. And although when I was go on.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, pre-internet. I mean, even 20 years ago, we would all, talk about depths of depression. I mean, we couldn't do anything.
When I was a kid, if it snowed a lot, we couldn't get to school. There'd be all these headlines in the papers like, it's terrible, the schools are closed. And we'd all go sledging, right? It was great. Nowadays, the poor kids have to work because they can connect with their teachers. I really feel sorry for them. But I feel really positive about the 20s. What happens after a dip like this is often there's a real bounce back. And there's some interesting data. There's a great guy called Randy White, a company called White Hutchison, in somewhere in the Midwest, I think, who's looked at some great data, particularly in the States, on the bounce back that's coming. But I've seen some other data. And it's worth pointing out, my stuff about my forecasting, I would tout my ability. But I wrote that book, Stuffocation, about this move from materialism to experientialism. And the reason I self-published at first, Dan, was that nobody believed me that I was true. The publishers in New York and London said no. 75 of them said no, because it's a nice idea, James, but it isn't true. But since that book came out, you know, lots of people have jumped on board and said, actually, this is happening, McKinsey and others. And I'm seeing the signs. I feel I've seen signs in different industries. You know, the numbers of people booking for Meow Wolf in Vegas. There's a company called the Institute of Competitive Socializing, who have this wonderful thing called Swingers. Is swinging your thing, Dan?
Not yet. No. Tell me more.
This is indoor crazy golf, or what you guys I think would call mini golf, and they've been successful in London, and they're just opening, I think, this year in Chicago and New York. And you know, with it between the pandemics, everyone's coming back to real life experiences. I think people are going to be looking to spend money to kickstart the economy. We're going to have a really exciting time. I think we're going to solve the problem with the climate. I feel really positive about that. I'm involved in an accelerator started by a former professor of mine at the University of Cambridge called Carbon 13. And the big mission there is to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And he's got bunch of whip smart people involved and people in this accelerator, and I'm sure that we will solve those problems.
Do you think that the pandemic has hastened this move, because it's made it's like a wake up call? It's like, hey, people, darn it.
Not for the climate, no. I think the pandemic has accelerated many trends. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Look, okay.
Maybe. Could you even say that it's been good for us? Because I think in a lot of ways it's made us rethink a lot of things.
You know the old line from Solon, the Athenian wise man from the Herodotus's histories, where he says, "Never call a man happy till he's dead." He was asked by the king of Lydia, a guy called Croesus, who was the richest man in the known world at the time. He said, "Am I happy?" He said, "I can't say." And he's like, "What do you mean? I've got all this." And he ends up, of course, he loses his kingdom, all his kids are killed, and he has a terrible end of his life, but he was very happy. So calling this a good thing or a bad thing is really hard to know at this point. I feel the same way about Brexit, for what it's worth. And even Donald Trump, I feel that he was a blip. I think he was an aberration. For me, very, 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 very funny, and I really miss him. Please bring him back, because this guy, Joe Biden, is sensible. He gets things done. He doesn't make a fuss about it. And he's not insane. Humans solve problems. The hero's journey is person, problem, solution. Kurt Vonnegut called it the man in Hull story. And what we did was when we had scarcity is we solved it. And now we have the problems of abundance. We're solving those. And so, yeah, I feel pretty optimistic about the future. We're going to have better experiences. The WXO that I founded with people like Joe Pine, with brilliant people around the world, we're about creating better experiences, which means that people will have better product experiences, better brand experiences, better experiences of life. The shift from caring about GDP to caring about well-being is important. We will live not only longer lives, but I think better, more meaningful, happier lives in the future as well. Thanks to great designers like you, Dan.
Well, thank you. And your statement just now just brought us back full circle to my first question about prosperity and a rethinking about what it really means. And it is about creating, well, more meaningful lives, more fulfilled lives, happier individuals, and so forth. And certainly design is a part of that. And you can be sure that the audience that we just spoke to has that in mind about what can I do as a designer? What can I do as an architect or a UX designer to move that bar, to raise it, to move it forward? So, James, I cannot thank you enough. I have so enjoyed this conversation. You and I could yammer on for another day, I think. So keep up the amazing work that you've been doing. I so look forward to your third book and more conversations. And I will see you at another bar in Las Vegas sometime soon, James.
Sometime soon. Thanks, Dan. Right. Fantastic questions. Thanks.
Thanks so much for everything. All right. Take care.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to PRISM. Follow us on whipsaw.com or your favorite streaming platform, and we'll be back with more thought-provoking episodes soon.
PRISM is hosted by Dan Harden, principal designer and CEO of Whipsaw, produced by Gabrielle Whelan and Isabella Glenn. Mix and sound design by Eric Buell.